So this topic is coordination control, and it can basically be split up into three sections. One, the nervous system. Two, the eye. And then part three will be hormones. Now, within the nervous system, what we'll do is a little introduction, and then we'll do the reflex arc. So let's get started. So the first part is just a little introduction to the nervous system and hormones. So a major difference between plants and animals is that animals can respond to the environment in a more rapid and complex way. A change in the environment is called a stimulus, and each stimulus often produces a specific response. Human body has two communication systems, the nervous system and the hormonal system. Both of these systems are important for coordinating responses in the body, but they vary in the speed and the nature of response. So there's two ways which are different, the speed and the nature of the response. Now, before we go any further, there's two things that we need to be really clear about. We've got this idea of a stimulus, which is a change in the environment. Now, that could be a change in the amount of light or the colour of light. It could be a sound that you can hear. It could be something that you smell. It could be lots and lots of different things. The response is what we do. Okay, so let's say, for example, you're sleeping, somebody comes in, turns the light on, your response might be to cover your eyes. If you hear a really, really loud sound, your response might be to jump. So we're actually going to look at the steps involved in what happens when there's a stimulus, so a change in the environment, and how you respond. Because it's not actually just as straightforward as turning on the light, covering your eyes. There's actually a wee bit more to it than that. But this first wee part is just about comparing the nervous system and the hormonal system. So this diagram on the left shows you the nervous system, and it's actually split up into two parts. We've got this part here, which is the brain and spinal cord, and this is known as the central nervous system. And then we've got all these other nerves coming off it, and those are known as part of the peripheral nervous system. Now, this actually shows somebody's nervous system. So here you can see their central nervous system, which is composed of the brain, the eyes, and the spinal cord. And then here, all these little noodly looking things, they are the nerves which go around the body, and that's part of the peripheral nervous system. So that's what the nervous system is made up of. It's made of the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. The hormonal system over at this side is pretty much made up of different glands. Now, all these glands do slightly different things. Well, I say they do different things, they all actually do the same thing. So the hormone system contains glands, and they all release hormones. So what I mean is that all of these glands will release hormones, but the hormones themselves are going to have different effects around the body. So for example, if we look at the kidneys here, they have a little adrenal gland on the top like a little hat, and it releases adrenaline, which can travel through the blood to the brain and to the heart. And we've also got the reproductive organs like the ovaries and the testes. They can produce testosterone or estrogen. So again, they're both glands, but they release hormones. So this part just shows a summary of the differences between the nervous system and the hormonal system. So they differ in terms of their speed and their nature of response. So the nervous system generally is very, very quick and acts rapidly, whereas the hormonal system is much more slowly. Usually it can be hormones will act over a couple of hours, or in the example of testosterone and estrogen, it can take place over many, many years. Their nature of response is also slightly different. In the nervous system, a stimulus is detected and leads to a response, whereas in the hormonal system, they're released from glands, they travel in the blood, and they go to a target organ. So this little part then just shows you a brief overview of how the nervous system works. So as we said, your nervous system detects a stimulus and carries out a response. But what I said earlier was that it was a wee bit more complicated than that. Okay, so here's what happens. If we start off with a stimulus, now as I said, the stimulus can be light, sound, it can be smell, it could even be changes in temperature. Say for example you touch something hot. What's going to happen next is the stimulus is detected by the receptor cells in your sense organs. So this is things like your eyes, and in particular your retina, your ears, your nose. If you're talking about taste, it could be your mouth. It could even be pain receptors in your skin. It could even be heat receptors in your skin as well. So the stimulus gets created, it gets detected by your receptor cells, so it's stimulus, receptor. There's then a coordinator in the nervous system. Now, there's usually two types here. It's either going to be your brain, and that's usually for slower responses that you need to think about, or your spinal cord if it's something that needs to happen very, very fast. Okay, so say for example, we smell something nice and decide to walk to it. Well, in fact, let's talk about it here, right? So the stimulus is something that smells nice. The cells in our nose detect that and they send a signal to your coordinator. Now in this case, it's going to be your brain. Because it's not really that urgent, it's just something slow. So what happens is your coordinator sends a message to your effector, which is usually muscles. Now, it can sometimes be glands, and then the response is carried out by the effector, which is the muscle. So in this case, we smell something nice, our receptor cells in our nose detect it, sends a message to the coordinator, which is the brain. That sends a signal to our muscles to make us walk towards whatever smells nice, and the response is carried out by the effector. So it might be walking towards it, or it could be lifting something that tastes nice and eating it. So that gives you a little summary of that. Now, let's say for example, we talked earlier about someone turning the light on. Okay, so let's say the stimulus is the bright light. It's detected by the receptor, which in this case is your eyes. It sends a signal to the brain, and it sends a signal to the effector, which is your arm muscles, and your response is to cover your eyes. So we have the stimulus, the receptor, the coordinator, the effector, and the response. Stimulus, receptor, coordinator, effector, response. Now, let's say for example, the stimulus is a hot plate. The receptor is going to be your skin. Now this time, it needs to be a much more rapid response because we don't want our skin getting burnt and we don't want our body getting damaged. So the stimulus was a hot plate. The receptor is going to be your skin. This time the coordinator, though, because it needs to be rapid, is your spinal cord. It sends a signal to the muscles in your hand, and the response is that you drop your plate. Now, of course, there could be something else. So if you're not holding the plate and you just touch it, it would still be the same stimulus, same receptor, same coordinator, but this time, instead of dropping the plate, it could be arm muscles, and in that case, you would lift your arm. So there's a few examples of this. Now, as it says here, the coordinator is usually the brain, but it can also be the spinal cord. The brain acts as a filter and determines which receptors link up with which effectors, and even if a particular stimulus brings about a response. So basically, the brain is used when you have to think about a response. The overall total of our responses to the environment around us is described as our behaviour. So there's a little definition. Your behaviour is the total of your responses to the environment around you. Now, if we look at this part, let's try and fill it in. So, let's say salty food. Now, it's easy sometimes to think about what the response would be. So, if you eat salty food, a good response might be to drink some water. So, in this case, salty food, that's the stimulus. The receptor is the taste receptor in your tongue. The coordinator, because you've got to think about this one, it's not rapid, would be your brain. The effector would be muscles, probably most likely in your arm, and that lifts the cup and drinks the water. The scent of prey, so let's say for example a fox was hunting a rabbit, the receptor would be the smell receptor in your nose. The coordinator would be the brain, and the effector again would be the muscles. And your response is to try and catch the prey, so it would be movement towards the prey. So just a really quick section, and we've already talked about this. We said the nervous system is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is the rest of the nerves that connect the rest of the body to the CNS. Now, as I say, the nervous system is composed of millions of complex nerve cells called neurons. So that is the proper name of a nerve cell. Just so we're clear, nerve cell is a neuron or neurons. They link the receptors such as the eye and the effectors by carrying messages in the form of electrical impulses. So whenever we talk about our nervous system sending messages around, it's actually electrical impulses. Now there's three basic types of neurons. We've got sensory neurons, motor neurons, and association neurons. Now sometimes these association neurons are called connector neurons or relay neurons. Okay, now here's what each of them does. The sensory neurons carry impulses from the receptors to the CNS. Motor neurons carry motor impulses to effectors such as muscles. And association neurons connect the sensory and motor neurons in the CNS. So if we go back to this little diagram, what we've got here is a stimulus gets detected by the receptors in the sense organs. The sensory neuron is going to carry that message from the receptors to the coordinators. The association neurons are found inside the coordinators. So your association neurons will only ever be found inside the brain or the spinal cord. And then the final one, when the message needs to be carried from the coordinator to the effector, that's where you would find the motor neurons. Okay, so they always go in the order of sensory, association, and motor. So let's look at this example again then. So somebody comes in, shines a bright light on us while we're sleeping. That's the stimulus. Our receptors detect that and in this case the receptor was the eyes. So your eyes send an electrical impulse along the sensory neuron to the brain. In the brain, the sensory neuron connects up with an association neuron, and then it sends an electrical impulse down a motor neuron to the effector, which is the arm muscles, and then your arm muscles contract and your response is to cover your eyes. So the last wee part of this booklet then, or sorry, not this booklet, there's this little section. In animals, the neurons are bundled together to form nerves. Okay, so a bundle of neurons equals a nerve. So this here whole thing is a nerve, and within that it has these little things which are neurons. So this part just then shows you a little motor neuron. So a motor neuron is the one which carries the impulse from the coordinator to the effector. And pretty much all neurons will have this sort of structure. So they've got a nucleus which contains the DNA from the cell, but they've also got this area up here which is the cell body as it's known, and then they've got these little extensions from them, one big long one in particular, and that's known as an axon. Around the axon you can see this little myelin sheath, so that is pronounced myelin, so myelin sheath, and it acts as an insulator and stops the message which is inside getting out, or stops anything coming in and interfering with the message. Now with these motor neurons, here's the direction of the impulse. So the impulse will travel along and it will join up to one of these points, and it's usually going to come from an association neuron. Association neuron. And it travels into the cell body, and then it'll travel this way into the axon, down along the big long axon towards the branched ends. Now these ends can either link with adjacent nerve cells, or they can link with muscles. And if it's muscles, whatever impulse is coming along here will make the muscles contract. Now one of the reasons why you might have actually heard of motor neurons is because there is this pretty terrible disease called motor neuron disease. Now this is genetic, so you can't catch this. You can only get it if you end up having copies of certain faulty genes. But the problem with this is your motor neurons stop working, and this happens later on in life, so you can actually end up paralyzed, which basically means you can't control your muscles. And one of the most famous cases of this was Dr. Stephen Hawking, who actually was predicted to live only until he was about 30, but he survived much, much longer than that, which was pretty amazing, to be honest. Now, this little part just shows you how the neurons are adapted to carry out their function. So their function is to carry impulses from the coordinator to the muscles. Okay, so here's all the way they're adapted. Firstly, they've got branched ends of the axon, which is this part here, and the small branching extensions from the cell body, which is here, and that allows the neuron to make junctions with other nerve cells. So I'm sure you've heard about there being like billions of connections within the human brain. So basically what's happening in the brain is you've got millions and millions of these neurons in your brain, and loads of them are connected to each other. So it allows lots of messages to be sent all over the brain, and then lots of messages to be sent all over the body. We've also got a myelin sheath. Now, a sheath is basically just a surrounding. So it's pretty much if you think of the wire for your phone cable. What a plonker. So what I was saying was that the myelin sheath is basically a surrounding, which if you think of your phone cable, you've got the wire down the middle and you've got the plastic around the outside so that the electricity doesn't escape. So that's sort of a bit like the myelin here. Now the myelin is produced by these special cells which surround the axon, and it acts as an insulator and it helps speed up the nerve impulses. Now, this is why it's actually important, right? Imagine you're a dinosaur. Now, the thing about these neurons is they can actually be really, really long. In dinosaurs, you could have neurons which were meters long. Now, imagine you're one of these big dinosaurs, which could be about 20 meters in length, and some bad little dinosaur comes and bites its tail. Now that's going to be the stimulus. Now if you compare these, this is how the myelin actually helps it. So something comes along, bites its tail, boom. Now you can clearly see here in this first one, the impulse travels rapidly. So that would be an example of a myelinated axon because it's faster. Whereas this boyo down below, imagine something comes along and bites its tail. If it didn't have myelinated axons, it would take this long. So someone comes along and bites its tail. Still don't know my tail's been bitten. Still don't know. Hey, who's biting my tail? So that's why this is an issue, right? If you have non-myelinated axons or neurons, it is very, very slow. So you want your axons to be able to send messages really, really quickly so that if part of your body is in danger, you can move it quickly. So for example, if I touch something really, really hot, I want to know that it's hot really quickly so that I can lift my hand so that I don't get burnt. Now, the next thing then is the axon. Now, the axon is a long extension of the cytoplasm, which in the human body can be up to 1 meter long, so that impulses can be transmitted from the CNS to the extremities of the body by one cell. So again, that makes it faster. And the final adaptation then is the nucleus, which controls the activities of the neuron and is surrounded by most of the cell cytoplasm in the cell body. Now, just to finish this little section off, just do this little test where you get a piece of paper and literally write down number 1 is B. So you don't need to write them all down. Just see if you can join up the correct word with the correct definition. Pause it now. So there's the correct definitions.